electricity. Okay. Hold on a second. As 60% of Texans do, they heat with resistance heat. And we saw what happened in February. That's not what brought ERCOT to its knees, but it was a big part of it, was COP of 1.0, 100% efficient electric resistance heat. Basically, I call it hair dryer heat or oven heat. That's all it was. And that's pretty tough. Then there's resistant heat with storage, something you see a lot in Canada. People heating up a bunch of bricks and then releasing the heat later. Yeah, that's not in Texas, but it's going on in other places. And really probably not ideal for Texas either, but who knows? That may be something that people start using there. Air source heat pumps, a possibility, and ground source heat pumps, another possibility. What makes the most sense? What makes the most sense in the long run? I think a question that's missing here is what makes most sense when things are really bad, because when it's really bad, that's when people are paying the most attention. And when I say really bad, I mean 0 degrees. Don't know about you guys, but during the polar vortex, our minimum bin temperature is 3 degrees for 1 hour a year. It was 20 below for a day here, and we had snow on the ground for 10 days. It was crazy. Is that going to happen again? Maybe. So electrification for heating, here's all your choices. Here's kind of how they score. This is based on the opinions of an expert panel, right? Who cares what an expert thinks? But these are directional. These aren't absolute numbers. But if you're talking about a homeowner's perspective, there are some things to consider. Initial cost, resistance heating is obviously the cheapest, and geothermal is obviously the most expensive. That flips on its head when it's cost to operate. It flips on its head when you're talking about extreme cold, and efficiency of operation is really the same as cost to operate. Flips on its head as well. When you see these numbers here in the left-hand column, 1 is the COP of resistance heating. Air source heat pumps kind of average out around 2. If you add resistance heat for very cold weather, they might average out around 1.5.
Tell folks what COP is, Will.
Oh, I'm real sorry. COP is how much heat you get out for electricity you put in. If you put in a kilowatt of electricity and you get a kilowatt of heat, that's a COP of 1. If you put in a kilowatt of electricity and get 4.5 kilowatts of heat, thermal energy, that's a COP, a coefficient of performance of 4.5. And that's what you'd see typically with a ground source heat pump. Sorry to take you down that road without any definitions. Some of you are already shaking your head saying that's impossible. How can you get 4.5 units of heat from 1 unit of electricity? Well, we'll talk about that just a little bit further down the road. From a contractor perspective, if you're a contractor, you probably know this better than I do. I've been a contractor, but if you're living by this every day, it's real easy to install resistance heat. You start thinking about how much money you make on these different options. You can make a lot of money putting in more complex solutions like heat pumps. So those are different considerations for contractors. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this. In fact, it's mostly just opinions. So, whoa, something happened with our slides here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about this solid rock in which I live and looking at that cost to install.
Yeah, we'll talk about that actually at the very end, Jason. That's not a problem. From a utility perspective, do they care? Does a utility care? Sure they do. They care about revenue, peak load. Load factor is a big one for utilities, and grid impact. One thing, just to kind of put a fine point on that, if you own a home with an air conditioner and a gas furnace, your utility probably hates you because you're using maybe 6 kilowatts all summer. And then on October 1st, you start using your furnace, which only uses about 600 watts. So you cut your heating and cooling power usage by a factor of 10, and you just sit on that for 6 months until it gets hot again, or in San Antonio, maybe just a few months. But the point is that that utility company has to maintain that 6 kilowatts of infrastructure while you're burning gas all winter. That's expensive. Imagine if whatever business you're in, if 90% of your customers stopped coming to see you from October through April. That could be expensive if you still had to maintain the same infrastructure the entire winter. That's kind of what this gets to here, is seasonal usage of electricity. So going back, here's why your utility company is thinking about ground source heat pumps versus air source heat pumps. This is a study done on Rhode Island. They said, what if we did 100% of air source heat pumps? We'd have to get 73,000 or 73 gigawatts of electricity just to take care of Rhode Island, which is about the size of Houston, right? And actually a little smaller than Houston. And if everybody used ground source heat pumps, our peak load would be about 44 gigawatts. So a little more than half. That's a big difference. So they're thinking about these things as in the Northeast in particular, where everybody's saying you got to get ground source heat pumps. Here's the numbers that they're thinking about. Here's another way of looking at the same thing. Peak is all that matters to the utilities, right? So if you're talking about this difference here, that's significant. That's billions and billions of dollars of generating capacity. So anyhow, if you want to electrify heating in Texas, these are things that all the different stakeholders have to consider. I suggest geothermal heat pumps are a really good solution in Texas. Jason brought up the rocks that he's living on. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But if anything's going to happen, the utilities are going to have to be the ones to make it happen, because they drive all the incentives. They make fuel either available or not available. One thing that strikes me as interesting is every house in America has electricity. It's had it for 50 years, and it will always have electricity. Kids are going to be charging their iPhones. I'm going to be watching the game, and the refrigerator's running on electricity. Just have to have electricity in every home. You don't have to have fossil fuels in every home. If I'm building a neighborhood in San Antonio, and I'm thinking about digging trenches and laying utilities, how much can I save by not putting in a gas line as a developer? How much can I save as a builder by not connecting gas and putting in an entire gas infrastructure in a house and just using electricity? One smart builder in Texas said to me, the only money I make is the money I save. So that might get somebody thinking about the possibility of not including fossil fuels, making them available in every home. That's just a possibility. And I know I'm talking to folks in Texas, and that probably sounds crazy, but my personal experience happens to be in the far Northeast. And I remember my parents scratching their heads and saying, why would anybody bring explosive gas into their house? And for some reason that stuck in my mind, and I still ask myself that question. And I've lived in a lot of houses with gas furnaces, and I've been a gas furnace product designer, product manager, salesman, and I still think about that. But anyhow, utilities are going to be the key. If they decide to make it available, it'll be available. If they decide not to, make fuel available, people will use electricity. So it's the strategies that your utilities come up with. One way that things are changing is, Encore, MEP, whoever, AEP, whoever your electrical provider might be, may have access to making more money. They're, as a regulated utility, they can only make a certain amount of money, and they're regulated in some ways, even when they're deregulated. But their earnings can be adjusted by their public service commissions, by doing renewables, by doing efficiency, by electrification, whatever the Public Service Commission or the regulators choose to do. I guess the Railroad Commission in Texas can direct earning adjustments based on what the utilities do. So it's all about the gold and who makes the rules. In God we trust, all others must bring data. One of my favorite sayings. Let me show you some data so we can talk about it. What would it look like if you could do this? Put current monitors, pressure monitors on 8,000 central heating and cooling systems and check it every 10 seconds and have interaction with it. Well, it would look a little bit like this. This is what we do today. For a couple of years now, WaterFurnace geothermal heat pumps have had monitors installed on a few of them. Some of the ones that we sell. This is the current populations of systems that have been operating for over a rolling 12-month period, and this is an average of their data across the United States. Interestingly, it's about $2 a day or less average. Something folks in Texas can take pride in is that you use a whole lot less energy than the folks in Michigan and Wisconsin and Illinois and Massachusetts and Maine. Those are the real, honest to goodness, energy hogs. And it has something to do with the age of the homes, but more it has to do with the temperature. The delta T and indoor outdoor temperature where I grew up was often 100 degrees. When it's 35 below zero and 65 degrees in the house, that's a big delta T, and that costs a lot of money. So good thing about Texas is that you're using less energy. At 12 cents a kilowatt hour, I think that's about right for most of retail power consumption in Texas. This is what it looks like. You can see the average is lower.
And each of those dots represents what now?
Each one of those dots is a central heating and cooling system with a geothermal heat pump.
Okay, okay.
And as I said, those are just the
relative energy use. I mean, I know if geothermal heat pumps are efficient, so I'm just trying to figure out how they have high relative energy use.
Well, let's take a closer look at a few particular examples. Keep in mind, most of these are in mega mansions or large 4 or 5 bedroom houses in Texas. So the energy use is relatively high compared to the rest of the country. Whereas the delta T is less, right? The bigger houses, but less load.
Yeah,
so,
builders aren't typically installing this on starter homes. Production builders aren't putting, although Whisper Valley was a great project.
Yeah, Whisper Valley's a terrific example. In Tyler, where I used to live, this is 2.5 megawatts total energy use to heat and cool, and really probably 90% of these units produce hot water, which is collected in a storage tank. So that's most of the hot water that's produced as well. 2.5 megawatts for heating and cooling and hot water. How does that compare to a typical Texas home? You can roll up all the gas, BTUs, all the electrical usage, water heating, etc. Probably going to be 3 to 4 times that much energy. Probably. Is how that would typically compare. Maybe double, depends. This particular unit is a variable speed, top of the line, 4-ton system. And, typically a 4-ton would go on a 3 or 4 bedroom home. And that's 2.5 megawatts a year. And so that's going to cost about $300 to heat and cool and make all the hot water. Either way you want to compare it, Some of you have personal opinions, personal experience. You can relate that to. Here's one in Houston. It's 3 megawatts. That's a 4-ton as well. So in Houston, maybe a 3-bedroom home, maybe, or we could go over to Austin, and that would be, another 4-ton. That one's working a little bit harder. Maybe it's on a bigger home. We don't, I can find out because I know the name and address of those homeowners. It's not available on this interface, but even still, they're only spending just under $2 a day to heat and cool their home, and using about 5 megawatts, 5.3 megawatts a year, heating and cooling and hot water. So that's good to know. Here's another good reason. We talked about the polar vortex. 60% of the folks in Texas using straight electric heat. The unbelievable cost of electricity during that vortex was in some cases equivalent to 3 years of power in 1 week of energy usage. That's going to have some lasting effects on ERCOT, and really all of you are paying the bills because you're ratepayers. But it was a weird situation, and it was the same thing here in Arkansas. One of my good friends works at a peaker plant down the road, and they could not run one of their gas turbines. They have 2 gas turbines, and they were just barely able to keep one at full speed because they didn't have enough natural gas. So there wasn't enough electricity to pump the gas to them, so they couldn't make enough electricity to pump the natural gas. And it was kind of a crazy, vicious circle. And we didn't have it as bad as you because, we're a little further north, we got a little more insulation. The temperature was a lot colder in Arkansas than it was in Texas, and parts of Oklahoma it was much colder, but maybe a little bit more prepared for the weatherproofing of the gas infrastructure. So anyhow, it's when you think about that week of peak crushing ERCOT, and you think about every 350 geothermal heat pumps on the Texas grid are saving a megawatt of peak load, you start multiplying that out and bringing that to scale, 350,000 homes in Texas on geothermal would save a gigawatt of peak in cooling, and frankly, quite a bit more than that in heating if you're offsetting straight electric heat. So food for thought. And because the way geothermal heat pumps work, they don't peak for a few hours. They'll run slow and low for long periods of time. So, I talked about the peak load, 350 houses is a megawatt. Seasonal load, you're using the infrastructure all year, so you're not creating seasonal variations that are crushing on the infrastructure. A utility that switches a house from a gas furnace and an air conditioner to a geo unit will net about 15% additional sales, but spread out over a 12-month period. And the load factor is dramatic. When you increase the load factor at an electrical utility, you really improve the resilience of the grid. So that, as the load factor levels out and increases towards 1 with geothermal heat pumps, that's significant and adds to the long-term sustainability of the electrical grid. So it has a lot of positive impacts on the utilities, which is why the utilities in New York State are paying about $10,000 per home to put in a geothermal heat pump. In South Carolina, where they have winter peaking, believe it or not, they're paying $1,600 a ton. And the state of Carolina is giving a 25% tax credit on top of the 26% federal tax credit. That's evidence to suggest that the utilities really do benefit from geothermal heat pumps because they're supporting it so aggressively. across
I
the
would
country.
actually make it cheaper to install. I would think, I mean,
Yeah,
$10,000 for a new air conditioning system, just a standard 16 SEER heat pump or something here, or, you know, a 5 ton, just your new construction. I mean, not quite that much, but on a change out, that's pretty
yep,
typical.
yeah. That's so with a geothermal unit, you know, if you spend 35,000, you're going to get the 26% tax credit. So you're going to get 6,000-ish back. You know, in a $10,000 rebate after the tax credit takes you down to about 15,000. And all of a sudden it seems pretty reasonable, especially when you look at all the technology. You saw the data reporting, you saw the controls capability there, inverter compressors, diagnostics, zoning, variable speed, airflow, the whole works. Here's an interesting chart on the right. If you look at typical closed loop performance, you know, you can see the cooling EER, which let's talk about that in Texas. The EER of full load and part load averages out, you know, in the high 20s, mid 20s maybe, for a geothermal system between full load and part load. You look at down here at the bottom, EER, not SEER, but EER, which is apples to apples. There's only one air source heat pump at 2 tons that even makes 16 EER, as compared to 25, all the way up to 53.2 EER with a geo unit. There are no 5-ton air source heat pumps in the world anywhere that make 13 EER, that achieve that. Now that's performance at 95 degrees Fahrenheit outdoors. That's 13 EER. There are no 5-ton systems that achieve 13 EER at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. However, at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you can see geothermal heat pumps are as low as 22, 19, and as high as 53. So that's a dramatic comparison right there. But those
I
are
don't know
just this government number.
Oh, sorry. If you're going to get to it, just wait till you get to it. But are you going to talk about latent and sensible and how that difference? I can just thinking of people in Beaumont. Well, is it going to remove moisture?
Yeah, you know, a variable speed compressor with a variable speed fan is the ultimate solution for dehumidification, right? So
Right.
like a variable speed geothermal unit can run at 20% capacity, meaning a 5-ton system can be a 1-ton system and matching airflow.
Gotcha.
So really what we're finding when we look at those houses in Texas, the details, right? That house in Houston, that's a variable speed, that one's not. That's a variable speed system there in Austin. That one will run as a 1-ton dehumidifier almost all the time. And when it ramps up, you won't feel hot air blasting out of the ducts while you cool off your attic, because you've been running a ton of cooling through it all along, or 2 tons or 3 tons, or whatever you need to just keep the house at a stable temperature. So those units will run 20, 24 hours a day, as opposed to turning on and off and blasting full speed and shutting off and blasting full speed. And that's part of the reason you get the humidity control and the comfort and the efficiency out of those systems. So that's a long answer to a short question, but yeah, they're great for humidity. You bet. Living on a rock, lots of great alternatives. One thing this country has is way too many horizontal boring machines, so much so that we've hired a guy to travel the country and teach horizontal boring operators how to put in geothermal loops. He's teaching them how to do it cost effectively through rock, through mud, through dirt, any kind of overburden, even through bedrock and limestone karst. He's teaching them new tricks of how to do it without popping up, so they can just drill down from the sidewalk underneath your house to the back of your property line, and then shoot it up through your slab into wherever your unit is. Or if you have an outdoor unit, they can shoot your loop up to your outdoor unit for geothermal. They can do it cheaper, faster, and in small lots. We're now at the point where we can do a single vertical bore, 500 to 650 feet deep, and give 5 to 6, really 6 tons of cooling or heating. We're doing that a lot in the Rochester, Buffalo area of New York, where it gets to be 35 below zero, and providing 100% of the heat with no backup heat in a single borehole. That's much cheaper, much faster, and much easier. And that's actually what I'm doing at my house here in Arkansas this summer. But it's just using different pipe, different grout, different techniques. And it's saving a lot of energy, saving a lot of plastic pipe, saving a lot of time in and out in one day, and just completely changing the game. So those are some of the things we're doing for the load side. Of course, there are lake loops, pond loops. Our factory in Fort Wayne is a couple 100,000 square feet. We've got a 35-year-old lake loop that's never been maintained, and it's 72 degrees in our factory 24/7. We use 1/4 amount of energy of our neighbors per square foot. And that loop was built on a sheet of ice back in the 90s. And when the ice melted, it fell to the bottom of the lake, 2-acre lake, and it's been heating and cooling that factory ever since. So there's lots of solutions out there. In New York City, we're looking at using the 13 million gallons of water they pump out of the subway every day to heat and cool the city. That water's perfect for it. It's already being pumped. We just need to run it through a heat exchanger, and we can heat and cool most of the city with that water. In New Orleans, you have a similar opportunity. Houston, lots of opportunities there with surface water. So lots of solutions, both on a residential scale and on a large utility scale. So already talked about this stuff, and really that's all I had to present today, but this is really what it's all about.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that water in New York, I mean, 13 million gallons, that's the electricity that has to take to pump that much water is unbelievable.
Yeah. If you're already pumping it, might as well take 5 degrees out of it before you dump it back in the ocean.
What would you say, as solar gets cheaper to install and more efficient, what would you say, just playing devil's advocate, or another argument? Oh, I can just put in an efficient, air source heat pump and some solar and some storage. But by the time you do that, if heating, cooling, water heating are your main costs, I mean, and with the tax incentives, it doesn't seem like that would be cheaper.
Yeah, solar's a complicated thing. So is wind. There's life cycles. One of the things about a geothermal heat pump is that one of the reasons the life cycle cost of energy on a geo unit is so much lower is because the loop lasts over 100 years with no maintenance, and the indoor compressor, and there's no outdoor equipment 99% of the time on a geo system, and it just lasts 30 to 40 years inside the house. As you know, in Texas, your outdoor system takes a lot of abuse. With the weather. So how does that connect to solar? Well, if you put in a 3 or 4 Tesla wall units, you can probably run a small air conditioner for a while. But the amount of electricity that an air conditioner uses is a lot more than you can store in a battery pack today. That may change, but it will change. But today it's, there just aren't enough kilowatt hours in a battery to run a typical air conditioner for very long.
So on a ground source heat pump, you would just have one indoor unit. Does that need to be inside the building thermal envelope, or could it be in the garage, or does that matter?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do it. Typically, a geo unit is just one box that replaces your existing furnace or your air handler. A lot of times it's a split system where you'd have like a box in your utility closet or your garage that would connect to an air handler in your attic or
Okay.
wherever it is, the closet. Lots of, any way that you can think of it, we do it. And we even have water hydronic units that pump water to fan coils. So lots of different ways. If you look at Texas and you think about, somebody out there is probably saying, I can't believe that you can provide 10 megawatts of heat with 2.5 megawatts of electricity. All you're doing with a heat pump is pumping heat. And in the case of a geothermal heat pump, you're pumping heat into the ground in the summertime and storing it there where it's 60, 70, 65 degrees, probably at 30 feet below your feet. And then in the wintertime, you're pumping that heat back up out of the ground into the house. And the electricity that you're using is just operating the pump to pump the heat down and pump the heat up. If you're comparing that to an air source heat pump, if it's 100 degrees out, it's really hard to pump heat from your house outdoors because it's already 100 degrees out there. But if you're pumping heat from your house into 65-degree dirt, that's easy. Or rock is even better. Rock is a much better heat exchanger.
Huh.
What
Just theoretically, what if every home in the entire United States was pumping their heat down into the ground? What would it do to the ground heat?
The couple orders of magnitude before it really became an issue, we find that when loops are 10 feet apart, they typically don't affect one another.
Okay.
And, down to 1,200, 1,500 feet. There's a lot of research on that done by the IGSHPA, the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association up at OSU in Oklahoma. It just, yeah, in fact, in Europe, and well, someday in Whisper Valley, we'll see that density of heat. To be cavalier, the earth don't care.
Yeah.
There's probably a fusion reaction at the core of the earth providing all the heat that we need. If it's not a fusion reaction, it's just the pressure, the heat of pressure.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows what's going on in the center of the earth.
Right.
But there's plenty of heat there for everybody. And in most of the populated world, heat is the problem. They need heat. Cooling is secondary. In Texas, the balance is residentially, it's close to 60-40, 65-35. So it's a little more balanced. But the heat you pump down in the wintertime comes right back, or pump down in the summer comes right back up in the winter. So, the earth is and the oceans are just big enough that it doesn't matter. We've got much bigger problems with ocean temperatures than heating and cooling buildings.
I had a question come in about cost. Is there a 2,500 square foot house in rock versus dirt, or what? Is there a ballpark cost or general cost? Is there anything you can say about cost?
Yeah, 2,500 square foot house would probably have a 3 or 4 ton unit on it in Texas, in my experience. That would be about a $35,000 installation, minus a tax credit and possibly minus an incentive from a cooperative or a utility.
And would that 35,000 apply to new construction and retrofits, or would that be a new construction cost?
New construction would be lower, typically 26 to 30,000 for that same unit, several $1,000s less. If no ductwork is required, 35,000 should be a high end for a 4-ton ballpark. I can't tell you what. I had a contractor right here offer to do me for $55,000, and that was his go away price. He wanted me to go away.
Yeah.
So you have to have some competitive opportunities there. If a contractor wants you to go away, he'll tell you it's 50 grand.
Right. Well, and that's what I would assume that is one of your primary barriers to really seeing this utilized more is competition among contractors that know what the heck they're doing to keep the
Yep.
price down.
Yep.
What about like my house where I've got a 3-ton upstairs and a 4-ton downstairs? What would you, or just any type of 2-story application, would you
Right.
be looking at 2 different air handler, quote unquote, or how would you do a split system? How would you recommend doing something like that?
Well, one funny thing is geosystems come in 6-ton units for some reason. It's in typical residential air source units only go to 5 tons. You could do a 6-ton system packaged unit where your downstairs unit is, connect the 2 and zone it. We have digital zoning available. Or you could just do two systems on one loop field where your real cost, the heavy cost, is in the underground part. And having a couple acres, you can dig a trench 6 feet deep if you can get that far down. Dig a 600-foot ditch and put several circuits in there, and you're on your way.
And just 6 feet deep. How wide would this 6-foot trench need to be?
30 inches, 24 inches. It's, a bucket width.
Yeah.
And,
it would be a rock saw in my lot. Both of my units are original to the house in 97. And so it's some point in the near future, I'm going to have to do something. So I'm sure I'll be following up with you as I'm trying to figure everything out and what I need to do.
Well, one of the things that's happening is because of government regulation and materials inflation, the cost of an installation in my short career, I remember in the mid 90s, it was $2,500 for a new furnace and air handler. That's quadruple with the 14 SEER, with the new refrigerant, with some of the safety controls, cost of materials, it's quadruple. It's easily $10,000 for kind of a basic installation on a retrofit. So that's a cold shower to a lot of homeowners that didn't realize that. But you've seen it, and we've experienced it with our cars that now have backup cameras and ABS and airbags. You can't buy a $10,000 car at the dealer anymore, like you could 25 years ago. But things have, everything's gone up a lot.
Right. Yeah, but if you're going to stay in the house, my main worry would be, I've just heard the horror stories about the contractors that don't really know quite what it is, that the comfort isn't what folks had hoped, but not because the unit doesn't work, just because the contractor didn't install it correctly.
Yeah, you got to get a factory certified contractor, and I work for WaterFurnace. Of course, we have a website with a dealer locator, and there are elite dealers on there called GeoPros, Clement Master, Enertech, Bosch, Carrier. They all have the same type of websites. I shouldn't be talking about my competitors, but they have similar capabilities. I will say that WaterFurnace is by far the technology leader, more than 50% market share. But so I have to balance that.
We're not going to get any. We're going to use WaterFurnace. Hop on WaterFurnace's website and find an authorized installer.
Yep. That saves you a lot of headaches.
CT, hi, nice to have you on here, CT. Can you discuss the need at Whisper Valley for peak load ground cooling, where they actually run a chiller to cool the groundwater?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. They recognized early on that the underground portion of the loop is the most expensive. That's the most expensive part of the entire system. So that was in the only money I make is the money I save theory among builders. The developer took that as an opportunity to save money, and a fluid cooler can do that. The downside is that that's helping to drain the Edwards aquifer. The upside is it's cheaper and it's pretty efficient. That's how a lot of large buildings in Texas are cooled is with evaporative cooling towers that use heat pumps or water source chillers. So it works, it's practical, it's inexpensive, it saves money on the underground portion, but it's really just a cost avoidance for Whisper Valley.
That scares the heck out of me, just because I think with our population explosion, we go 3 summers in a row of 3 months straight of 100 something and no rain. And what's our groundwater going to look like at that point? You know, that is, I think 10 years from now, there's a decent chance that water is a major problem in this state.
Yeah, in Nashville, Tennessee, the airport was using fluid coolers, towers similar to the Whisper Valley, but on a bigger scale.
Mm-hmm.
And they found they had a quarry full of water in the middle of the airport, like between the runways. It's 400 feet deep, full of water. So they put a bunch of heat exchangers at the bottom of that quarry and put 3,600 tons of heating and cooling in the airport using that quarry. And the interesting thing is most of their savings hasn't necessarily been on electricity, but on their water bill from not evaporating water all summer to cool the airport.
Huh.
So in California, we'll be seeing a lot of water restrictions coming on top of electrical restrictions. And the only real solution they've got is going to be ground source. But because of Californication of the laws out there, they've made it so difficult to permit drilling that something's got to give. Because anytime you drill below 30 feet in California, the spoils are toxic waste and have to be put in stainless steel drums by people in hazmat suits. So, that's California.
Yeah, they're
something's got to give.
Yeah, what's got to give is everybody's leaving California and moving to Texas, where it's not crazy bureaucracy. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, is what it is.
Yeah. So really, the interesting thing is that as you start looking at peak load, you start looking at water, you start looking at CO2, start looking at population explosion, you look at all these things, and very quickly you start to realize that the ground as a thermal resource is really the next frontier. That's where we've got to go.
Yeah.
So I'm out of material, and I don't want to get any more into politics and opinions, which I'm dangerously too far into. But,
no, we are right at 9 o'clock. I need to know more. So like I said, I'm sure I'll be pestering you over the next year or two as I'm planning to replace my stuff. But it just, everything I've always heard about it makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know why we insist on first cost being the only thing we consider, but it's like in America, that is our MO. And I don't know that it's going to be fixed anytime soon.
Nope.
But Will, it was a great presentation. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, this morning. Man, you finished right on time. We are at 10 o'clock on the dot. Any last words or parting? I'll give you the last word or parting words of wisdom, and then we'll shut her down.
Please don't take offense at anything I said. I was just trying to be funny, and thank you for your time. I look forward to coming back to Texas and seeing you, Jason.
Sounds good. Hope to see you soon. Thanks for joining us, everyone, this morning. Y'all have a great day. Bye, everybody.